Because I'm not able to be with you in class today, I thought we would use this as an opportunity to go over chapter 1 in George Weigel's Letters to a Young Catholic. And if you take out your review sheets from chapter 1, The Catholic Difference, we will look at what makes us different as Catholics and how our Catholic faith helps to see the world in a unique way. In the first question, we ask, what is the Catholic difference and how does it affect the way in which we see the world? And for this, the answer is very simple. It's that Jesus Christ helps us to see the world through his eyes, through his hands, through his actions, through his salvation. We want to make sure that we understand the importance of what it is to be Catholic. Obviously, all Christians around the world see the world through the eyes of Christ. The difference that we have, as we've gone through the chapter, is going to be whether it's Marian devotion, whether it's through the Pope, but also, most importantly, the Eucharist. And we'll be focusing on the Eucharist over the next couple of days to look at really what the Eucharist does for us, how it transforms us, how it helps us to see the world in a very unique way. That's going to be very, very important. But to use Christ as kind of the measuring point for how we see life. He is the standard of all things. He is the one who helps us to see the world in a unique way. So this is going to be important. Make sure you understand that through Christ, we can do anything. We can change the world. We can affect the people around us. We can do everything in a way in which no one else makes possible. This is through the incarnation. He becomes one of us so that we can become just like him. We want to comment in question 2 on how the worldview relates to history, relates to humanity, and relates to nihilism. First of all, George Weigel will use a play on words. We take the word history and we make it his story. It's the story of God. It's the story of God working through the world. It's how he helps us to change the world through him. If we think about why we're created, we are created to love and serve God. That's the most important thing. Now, in this action of loving and serving God, the world should take on a whole new meaning. Everything becomes of consequence. All of the actions of humanity, if they are centered around Christ, take on a very, very different meaning. So we want to make sure that we understand his story. That's history. So make sure you understand that play on words. Humanity. If we go back to the story of Adam and Eve, humanity is going to be this creation of God, but immediately we are going to turn away from God in a very quick way. It becomes about selfishness. It becomes about how we are consumed with becoming better than God. It becomes about how we are focused only on ourselves. We see Adam and Eve. We see the story of the Tower of Babel. We work through even Cain and Abel. And then finally, we're even going to get through the story of Noah, where God will deem it necessary to kind of just wipe out the world except for Noah and his family. So that's through humanity. But through humanity, we have the creation. Then we sin. Then God realizes that he needs to save us. So don't forget about it. It's creation, sin, redemption, and then sanctification. And then finally, nihilism. If you remember from last year in Man's Search for Meaning, you define nihilism as believing that nothing makes sense. There's meaning in nothing. And as we go through this life, we're just kind of put here to kind of go through the motions. Nihilism is going to be very, very important to understand because atheism is really based on nihilism. We go through this world and we're really not going to make any sense. God is not present in anything. We believe the opposite. God is in everything. He permeates every single action. And we talk about this with our joys, whether we're sitting in school, whether we're sitting in traffic, whether we are doing the most mundane things like mowing the lawn. Everything should take on meaning, even in the simplest and even in the most joyful things. That's going to be important. So how do we see our relationship with God? Through his story. How do we see the story of God through his creation? And then finally, how do we use Catholicism as the antidote to nihilism. That's going to be important. Next, describe 5 things that are uniquely Catholic and how these things set us apart from other faiths. And we talked about these, some of these things at the onset. We talk about Marian devotion. Why is Mary important to us? Mary is the vehicle through which we get to Christ. Through her Son, she shows us that he is love. She becomes the first disciple. In chapter 4 of this book, we're going to get into the story of Mary and her relationship with Jesus, and that's going to take on a whole different role for us as a Marianist school. We're going to look at this special relationship that we have with her, but let's look at that at a later time. But Marian devotion is very important, whether it's the Rosary, the May crowning, we pray the Hail Mary every day, we have the Angelus. All of these things are going to be important. You should be writing all of these different things down, just so you have a sense of why Marian devotion is important to us. Another thing, the Pope. The Pope, in the succession of Peter, the apostolic succession, we go all the way to Peter. Chapter 2 will be on Peter himself, but we want to look at what is the importance of the Pope. He is not only the leader of Catholics, but he stands in the chair, at the Vatican, through the chair of Peter, to show us this faith. Even though we are not perfect, Jesus gives us a special mission in this life. He chooses us to follow him. He asks us to take on this unique role. This is going to be important, right? So, Marian devotion and also the Pope. If we look at the saints are going to be very, very important to us. We've talked about St. Francis, we've talked about Mary, we've talked about even St. Therese. This is going to be important to look at the saints and to see their role, their conversions, and how they have shown us the way to live a perfect life in an imperfect world. That's going to be important. Also, another way in which we are different, Holy Days of Obligation. This is going to be important. All Saints' Day on November 1st. The Immaculate Conception on December 8th. The Annunciation on March 25th. All of these are moments throughout our liturgical year in which we take time to pause on significant events and part of salvation history and how we change the world through Mary, through Jesus Christ, and through his church. That's going to be important as well. Now, we can cite many other things on how we are expressively different, but the main thing, do not forget, is going to be the Eucharist. Flannery O'Connor, we're going to have this story, we're going to go over it in a few minutes with Mary McCarthy, but that's a significant story because the Eucharist should mean everything to us. It should be something that we want to receive every week. It should be something that's so important to us. Let's think about how we can change our lives through the Eucharist. The fourth question, debonair nihilism. What exactly is nihilism? We talked about nihilism being this belief in nothing. Debonair nihilism is this gentle way in which the world today kind of goes through the motions, and we're consumed with materialism. We're consumed with ourselves. We're consumed with image. We're consumed with looking like other people who have nothing to give us in this world. Fame turns out to be just simply about getting your name, getting your image on TV. Why do we get sucked into debonair nihilism? Because it looks attractive. It's not the dark nihilism of the atheists like Nietzsche and Camus. It's not going to be that kind of nihilism. It's going to be a nihilism which we kind of shut out God. We create a godless world. We think that it's going well, but it's really not going well. So what happens in this world? We end up kind of creating this world in which it looks nice, but is empty. It's like buying a brand new Mercedes and having nothing under the hood. There's nothing there. There's nothing to drive us. There's nothing to get us from one point to another. You know, as Father Tom will often say, life is like a pencil without, that's like an unsharpened pencil. It has no point without God. It's going to be something that we need to have God in all things for it to make sense. So make sure you know what debilitarianism is. It's this way in which we live our world. Basically, in a sense, we put a beautiful coat on it, but it means nothing. And we fill our lives, whether it's with money, whether it's with fame that leads us nowhere, that looks very good, but really ends up to be very empty. Fifth question. Who is Flannery O'Connor? And how did her writing reflect her Catholicism? And we'll also talk about the story between her and Mary McCarthy. Now, with Flannery O'Connor, she's this tremendous Catholic voice that was very, very strong in her faith. She comes from down south, which is not a Catholic place. And what Flannery O'Connor is able to do is she stands as like this beacon in the very, very Protestant world, and she shows her Catholic difference. She wanted to kind of hold up this mirror to the world and say, listen, this is how you are living your life. This is why things are not going well. It's because we're just going through the motions where we're kind of living a life in which we think we're doing the right thing, but we're only consumed with ourselves. We're only consumed with our own will. This is going to be one of her main themes. At times, her writing looks kind of over the top, as George Weigel says, a little bit like a grotesque satire, but really she's trying to show us, like as we see on reality TV, and we talked about this last week, that really in the end, we kind of see the idiocy sometimes. We see that people are just acting insane. It's kind of ridiculous the way they act, but yet it's not until we roll the tape back and we look at it a little bit more closely that we realize that it has no meaning. Without Christ, without a life that's immersed in his church, immersed in what he wants us to be immersed in, and that's love. Right? Love is going to be the central theme of Jesus Christ. Very simple. How do we move out of ourselves and to one another? Okay? The story of Flannery O'Connor and Mary McCarthy is a significant one because Flannery O'Connor is invited to this dinner party. Here she is, and she is making small talk, and everyone's very, very excited to have this up-and-coming writer at this big party, this socialite party in New York. And they start talking about the Eucharist, and in the middle of this conversation, someone makes a reference that basically says that the Eucharist is a beautiful, beautiful symbol. And Flannery O'Connor is going to just kind of erupt and say, if it's a symbol, then to hell with it. And that's going to be important because it's not a symbol. We believe it is what Jesus said it is, and that's his body and his blood. We want to make sure that we understand the importance of the Eucharist. We have the ability, as often as we can, to receive him. We hold him in our hands. The creator of the world, the king of all things, the universe, the one who was with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit since the beginning and will be throughout every age. He is all things, and that is his gift to us. That's one of the biggest things in our Catholic faith that's certainly going to make a big difference for us. The Catholic difference, the Eucharist. So here she is at this dinner party. Someone says, oh, it's a great symbol. And she makes it very, very clear. It's not a symbol. It is everything to us. The Eucharist is very, very important to us. Are we receiving the thing? This is what we really want to think about. Is the Eucharist part of our lives? Think about that. As you reflect on this today, how often do you receive the Eucharist? Is it part of every Sunday? Every weekend we say, there is nothing to do except to spend time with your family and base your weekend on your reception of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Are you taking advantage of that? That's what we want to think about. What does George Weigel mean by the habit of being? We're going to use this as a play on words. It's the habit of being Catholic, that our entire life should be shaped around receiving Christ and giving Christ. Is he the center of all things? The Gospels are very, very simple for Jesus. Here's what he does. He goes to reach the people that need him most. He goes and sits at dinner with them. He has conversations. He asks them, what's going on in your life? He knows what's going on. So he really wants them to admit to themselves, here's what's really not going well for me. what does he do? He's going to use that as an opportunity to gently invite them to follow him, to join the kingdom. That requires a conversion. That requires living a whole different type of life. Are we thinking about the way that we are living? This is what Jesus constantly asks us. The apostles he does this to the prostitutes, to the tax collectors, everyone he meets, he's constantly challenging. How are you living your life? This is going to be very important. What are we doing? Are we living in this way, or are we living according to the law of love? The very, very simple commandment he gives us is the law of love. Love one another. That means going outside of ourselves to make sacrifice for us. Remember, we talked about the unsentimental realism of Christianity. What do we mean about the unsentimental realism? That Jesus dying on the cross, even though he could be angry with us for doing this to him, goes beyond that. Unconditional love goes beyond a simple emotion which rises and falls every time that we feel a different feeling. We need to think about this relationship that we have with everyone around us. Are we reaching out to them as Jesus would? We have people who are lonely around us. We have people that need our care and concern. We have people that all it would require is spending a few minutes with them each day and reaching out to them. Are we doing that with them? So it's going to be important. The next question, question 6. What does Flannery O'Connor mean by wingless chickens? A wingless chicken would be something that goes against its nature. Our nature as human beings is to love. This is why we're created. This is the gift that no other being on this earth has. We could say we receive love from cats, from dogs, from different animals. They don't make a conscious effort to make sacrifices. They don't go outside of themselves. They act purely on instinct. Human beings act, their nature is going to be to love. This is what Christ prompts us to do. And he knows that the challenge of that is going to be, how do we end up fighting this this nature that we're going to kind of push ourselves out against. Very, very important. To be one with him means to be people who love. Okay, that's going to be important. Next, the difference between pre and post Vatican II. There are going to be tremendous changes in the church. The language at Mass goes from Latin to the vernacular. That's going to be important. We're also going to go from the laity kind of having a very laid-back role to really now being encouraged to take on this very, very active role in the church. I want you to keep that in mind. We're going to talk about this further. This is all going to kind of be brought together as we go through the year. What is our role in the church? The universal call to holiness. How do we take part in the church? What are the roles that we have in our own church? What do we do here at school? Are we active Christians, or are we simply Christians that stand on the sidelines? Everything from Gregorian chant is going to change. We have more modern music. These are going to be important, but Vatican II is going to be significant because it's going to help us to become more active, not only in the church, but in society. Okay, so this will be our review for today. I want you to look at this, make sure you have the correct answers for this review, to make sure to go through and know all of these different review questions, because they will be significant when we come to our exams, being able to articulate our faith, being able to talk about our faith and understand what our faith is all about. It's based on Christ. It's based on his commandment to love and the gift that he's given us, which is the Eucharist. Make sure you know these major themes, and make sure you know how we are supposed to put them into practice in our own lives.